Frequency Podcast Network. Stories that matter, podcasts that resonate.
This year has been one of the slowest in recent memory for new home sales. The term housing drought being used to describe the pace of construction. There were just 118 new condo sales in Toronto in the month of August. That was the lowest level in decades. Anything that's been built recently is just basically sitting there. Newly built homes are sitting unsold, and developers are putting new projects on hold. And a new study in this week gives most Ontario municipalities 22 out of 34 total failing grades when it comes to red tape and taxes when it comes to accelerating development. Toronto, Brampton, Ajax, Oshawa, Vaughan, Guelph, Hamilton, and Peterborough were just some that got an F on the report card. Just Milton and Brantford got A's. All this as the federal government and the province have been trying to get more homes built faster. So how do we get to this situation? And what are the solutions? Welcome to In This Economy. My name is Mike Eppel. That report on municipalities was prepared by researchers at the University of Ottawa, commissioned by the Residential Construction Council of Ontario. The president of ResCon, Richard Lyall, joins me on the line. Hello there, Richard.
Good morning, Mike.
The state of construction, it is not good. All of the talk has been, as you know, getting more homes built, and that we seem to be going in reverse on that trend right now in the province. What's gone wrong here, Richard? A lot of talk, not a lot of action.
Well, the first thing I can say, I'm a former economic development guy, and I actually worked on the original NAFTA deal. I was a trade guy in the government. And then I paid my way through school as a construction worker and ended up, doing what I'm doing now. And I've been doing it for about 30 years. I went through the last major correction. So I got a little background on this. And what's happened here has been, sort of it's not funny. I was going to say a comedy of errors, but the housing situation that we're in right now is probably, in terms of crises, is probably definitely the worst in North America and one of the worst in the developed world. And that's because there's a complex set of factors that sort of came together like a perfect storm to get us where we are now. And, the problem right now is that our costs are too high relative to what the market will bear. One of the things that we did badly over time was through the economics of scarcity by not supplying enough housing, not producing enough housing for various reasons, and we can discuss that. That created what I think of as the financialization of housing, because we turned housing into an investment play, and the new housing became the number one industry in Ontario, which it shouldn't be. And so eventually this continued, and we did research on this and warned that we were headed for a cliff. And but unfortunately, we're hitting a wall now, and hopefully some things will change. And I think one of the differences between this correction and the last big one in the early 90s is the governments at various levels have the power to change things and turn it around.
Well, you talk about the commoditization, I suppose, of housing. You look at, let's focus on the condo market right now, first off, because what was built, a lot of it was built for investors and not necessarily to be lived in. When you're talking about a shoebox condo, less than 600 square feet, it's fine for a single. It's not in any way near way, suitable for a family. So, a lot of these are sitting unsold, the ones that are currently on the market. And a lot of investors have actually, anecdotally losing their shirts on previous purchases. So, that right there was a sign that the market had focused more on the money side of things as opposed to actually for living space.
100%. And how we got there was a dysfunctional market. So, I liken it to water flowing down a hill. It'll find a way. Markets will work somehow if they can. And we really put a huge restriction on low-rise housing. We've had that missing middle housing that you've heard about. It's still missing. So a lot of effort and money and investment went into high-rise, and we were really, really good at that. And then because of a bunch of technical standards as well, these are restrictions on how you can actually design buildings. and because of the investor play there, we built and arguably overbuilt small units. And of course that ran its course until, of course we got where we are now. So it was a bubble, right? In a classic bubble in economic terms. And I'm sure you're aware of how bubbles function, how they build up, when they drop, and then where you go from there. The good news here is that we need the housing supply, but we've got to find our way to maintaining some supply and then working our way through that particular problem. Now, most of that is isolated in the Toronto core, that condo bubble. And there's still the broader province and 905 and so on, where we still do need housing. And of course, an added complication we have right now are geopolitical factors, a trade war, things like that, any economy should try to prepare for those unforeseen things. And we're not in really good shape to deal with that right now, needless to say.
Yeah. Is this a situation, though, where, again, you come back to the regulatory environment, that, these proposals were put out there? Did no one say, that's not what we need to be built? We need more housing that was suitable for families, not so much for the singles, and that would have maybe warded off the investment focus for some of these projects?
Yeah, well, what part of the problem is we're the most decentralized developed country, right? In the G7 or G20. And so the accountability for housing has kind of been split between three levels of government, arguably fourth yet, in regions. And so no one was really paying attention to the big picture here. Like, for example, when the government a few years ago doubled immigration without any regard given to housing supply or to healthcare services. By the same token, in the province of Ontario, when they had this massive boom in foreign students, and nobody really paid attention to students' housing. And we know that story. So this is a bad growth management writ large. It's not just a housing crisis. We've got other issues too that need to be addressed. And somehow the various levels of government need to get aligned. And they're still not aligned on housing in Ontario. I mean, and if you contrast Ontario with Alberta, and I'm writing a piece on a tale of two provinces, Alberta's is producing on a per capita basis 3 times the housing that Ontario is producing. And they're on fire. And of course, there's a different story in other parts of Canada too. But when you compare the two, it's really quite astounding. And in Alberta, all the data points line up until you get to housing. Where an average home in Alberta is just over 500,000, an average home in Ontario is just over 800,000. And the difference is the taxes, fees, and levies and red tape. And by the way, by red tape, it's the amount of regulation and the complexity and the inefficiency of the procedures, the approvals processes, which costs an enormous amount of money. But those are the two big differences between Alberta and Ontario. And Ontario's got to wake up and fix that. The municipalities, big problem there, NIMBYism, everything else like that. But at the end of the day, municipalities are just creatures of the province. There's nothing in the Constitution of Canada that provides for municipalities. So ultimately, the province can tell them what they need to do, but the province hasn't been prepared to do that to the extent that they need to. And then you've got the feds in there with the sales taxes and so on that were originally supposed to have been adjusted for inflation, but didn't. So where we are today, about 35% of the cost of new housing in Ontario is taxes, fees, and levies, which is crazy. We don't treat food like that. And housing occupies a unique economic space. It's a need. It's not a want. I mean, it's a want for some people, but for the vast majority of people, it's a need, and it's the biggest thing they'll ever spend money on in their lives.
I just want to go through some of these numbers because about this study that that was just released this week, and the housing starts data and the municipalities in this report card housing starts down in Toronto 58%, sales down 91%. This is just Toronto proper, but you look at 22 municipalities across the province getting a failing grade when it comes to home construction. So what was that? What were the grades based on specifically?
So, and one thing I'd say first, a lot of people said, well, it's just the condo problem. Well, it's not just condos. This is industry wide. The grading was based on a methodology produced by, University of Ottawa and the Missing Middle Initiative. Dr. Mike Moffat, he put that together. And one of the things we wanted to achieve there was that a lot of the data that was being relied on for forecasts was dated. It wasn't current data. So part of this project was to pull together existing and current data in a new way and include rentals and include high rise and low rise and say, okay, where are we and where are we going? And then because of the complexity of housing economics, market economics, and the complexity of what's happened with housing, the various things that have gone into put us into this predicament right now. Because of that, we needed to come up with a simple way to sort of relay what's really happening. And we had to put that in the context because we've had these sort of incessant announcements on, this project here and this announcement there. 134 units being built here, and here's this new program and whatever else like that, which kind of, gave the impression that there was real progress being made when on the street, we were looking at where starts are and where the sales are pointing starts, where the starts are going to go. And of course, if you have a 91% drop in the sale of anything, eventually you're going to have a 91% drop in production, right? So we needed to set that out, but put it in a way that the public can understand. And of course, everybody understands an F. And the methodology to get to the F is a combination of sales starts. It's in the back of the report. Mike can talk about it better than I can. But it's, it's solid, it's defensible. And then we're going to do this every quarter. So we start tracking this. And some of the rough edges will smooth out, but it is what it is. And as I said, with Alberta on a per capita basis producing 3 times the amount of housing that we are, and they can't build fast enough, we've got a problem, right? So that needs to get turned around. And it can be. This is the good news. If it were back in the early 90s again, I'd say we're doomed. But no, this can be fixed.
Well, before we get to the solutions, I just wanted to follow up though on the rating,
sure.
Because when we're talking about the high fees and taxes and all this that goes into the permitting process, I'm guessing that the municipalities are saying we need the money for the infrastructure to build all this because they've been downloaded from various levels, the feds, the province, down to the municipalities to get these projects going. But to do that, where does the cash come from for the infrastructure?
Well, no, you're absolutely right on that. That's something that's being discussed, and we've raised that as well, is that there needs to be a new funding formula or a new formula for supporting growth-related infrastructure. For example, the federal government for the last 10, 20 years have been the biggest profiteers on housing. They've been taking 5%, right? Billions of dollars every year, but their share of investment in infrastructure was around 7% of the total. The rest was split between municipalities and the province, which wasn't exactly, fair or justifiable. So there definitely needs to be a new way of doing things. The other thing is that, a lot of this development charge, and by the way, a development charge is nothing more than a regressive consumer tax. It's just paid up front by the builder or developer, but it comes out in the wash on closing. And it became a runaway train. Nobody was really paying attention to where these things were going. So it's like death by 1,000 cuts. And then you got into these sort of bizarre, surreal situations where, for example, even though it got out of control, and many municipalities were building up these huge reserve funds of cash from these DCs. Like City of Toronto's got over $3 billion in cash sitting there. They couldn't spend it enough. But then the City of Toronto turned around recently and said, okay, well, we're going to freeze development charges this year. No increase this year. And we kind of chuckled at that, even though, again, it's not funny, because the year before they raised 43%. So, you've got these 1,000+% increases in development charges. And for young people and young families that most of whom do not have the benefit of having parental support are just getting killed. They can't, that dream of home ownership dying you've heard of, that's where that comes from largely. And then on the red tape side of things, we know, looking at other advanced jurisdictions, and we have traveled the world looking at, who does things better than we do. And we've been to other jurisdictions. They're 10 to 20 years ahead of us. Their process technology, the prop tech they use, is just, and they've got like, a third of the government agencies involved in approvals than we do, and they just get things done. So, for example, I'm going to be back in Germany in 4 weeks. They're cutting edge on software, production equipment, and offsite construction, and they're not talking about government being the problem or taxes being the problem. The problem for them are technical challenges, market challenges, and so on. But the government isn't the problem. Here, government is the problem, and government should not be the problem in any market economy. It just defeats the purpose of a market economy, as I'm sure you can appreciate. So the challenge ahead of us is huge. The concern was that, and we're here now, we're hitting a wall, we're crashing, and some people don't even like me saying that or us talking about that because they say, well, it's going to hurt what little market we do have. But the reality of it is that's where we're at. And that will, because it's going to show up in the government coffers or not, as the case might be, that will force change. The lag thing, and the other part of the report is that because the data that they were working off of was generally old, and the forecast team was based on, past performance, many people didn't understand the nature of bubble bursting and how a market can drop. And that's where we're at right now. And so we needed to, educate on that too as well, and point out that, just don't look at all the, we still got lots of tower cranes in the sky, but those tower cranes are just finishing off projects we sold in the last 5 years. There's almost no new projects coming forward. Rental took off for a little bit there, but now it's stalled. And we need, and then people say, well, modular housing is the solution. Well, there's 3 projects looking at modular housing I can think of that are of any consequence. But if they get up and running in 3 or 4 years, we're talking 10,000 units, and we need what? 300,000 units, right? Yeah. So the government has to find its way. They have to grow up, get aligned, and recognize that the market is dysfunctional, and they need to make these changes to make it functional. And the bottom line, if we can't produce something that people can afford, well, we're not going to produce it.
Well, your organization, ResCon, just hosted this conference this week to talk about all this with various levels of government in attendance and jurisdictions, actually. So let's talk solutions. What was the takeaway from what people were saying about how to reignite home building, specifically in Ontario?
Well, I think, one of the key messages I took, it was really a fantastic presentation, was Minister Williams from Alberta. And where they are doing a spectacular job at increasing housing supply. They can't build fast enough out there, And one of the things he pointed out was that the responsibility for housing really does lie at the provincial level, or territorial for that matter, but at the provincial level, because municipalities are creatures of provinces. They don't exist in their own right within the Constitution. Provinces can determine whether a municipality exists at all legally. And so if there's a problem at the municipal level, then the province has to step in. And that's what they're doing in Alberta. They've gone, and so they have cut down their approvals time. It's spectacular compared to Ontario. They've streamlined a lot of things, and they have more to do. They have an aligned vision, though, within their government in Alberta that housing affordability, and affordability, relatively speaking, I'm not talking about social housing, but affordability, relatively speaking, is priority one. So that's the first priority in the various considerations relative to, say, for example, green building and things like that, which became a bit of a runaway train. So his presentation was fantastic in imparting that message, and of course, the results speak for themselves. Then we had, a few academics there. We had Carl Haas on housing technology. We had Professor Lee from Ottawa on housing markets and the problem with things like, these blind adherence to green belts that quite often don't make a lot of sense in terms of the amount of housing they prevent the building of. And then we had Minister Flood, and that was great. It was a great Q&A with Minister Flood from Ontario. It was very good. We had a few panels, Ted Siakopoulos from CMHC, and we had Jason Mercer from Toronto Real Estate Board talking about the market issues. And so that combined with the report, we're going to be driving some of these things going forward, but certainly driving the numbers to say to the province and the federal government, you really got to cut these taxes. Like, we don't tax food like this. We're taxing housing like cigarettes in Ontario, or alcohol, if you prefer to use that comparison. We need to cut the taxes. We've got to cut the red tape further, streamline. I was on a panel 20 years ago with Paul Bedford, former commissioner of housing in Toronto, about as of right zoning along main streets and avenues. And we're just doing it now. Like, we need to pick up how quickly we adapt and change. And then we have to modernize our approvals processes. The solution to any complex problem often lies in the process that you follow to do it. And our procedures are so inefficient, antiquated. We need to go with building information modeling, digital twinning, big data analytics. We need to model. Like, for example, these housing targets right now that various levels of government have, we're never rooted in any serious planning or a plan per se. But we've got to do that, and we can do that. I mean, if you think about the financial industry and the modeling and forecasting they do there, I mean, why can't we do that with housing and say, okay, if we need 50,000 units, how are we going to get there in 5 years? What's the plan, right? And we need to do things like that. And then we need to align that planning with things like healthcare services and education and, and the like, and immigration and skilled trades immigration. So, our growth management planning is a disaster, bottom line. But we're smart people, right? It's not that Canadians are dumb. It's just that we've got to get our act together.
Well, everything you've mentioned there, though, if to cut taxes at the municipal level, for example, that sounds to me like the premier is going to have to offer up some carrots to the municipalities. Sure. To get them moving, because there's been resistance. I mean, you've got, when we're talking about farmland being used, and don't even, you mentioned the green belt. That's probably a non-starter for the Ford government right now. I know. But municipalities have faced pushback from the Ontario Federation of Agriculture related to using farmland in certain jurisdictions for housing. All these things that you gotta, I don't know how you move things along.
So on that municipal level, both levels of government have acknowledged a problem with DCs, and there are efforts at the provincial level to come up with these municipal services corporations to pay for and properly assign the cost. The problem with development charges, it was putting everything on the backs of first-time home buyers and renters, and they were just getting crushed. So the province has recognized that needs to get fixed. The federal government, Carney's new government, properly recognized and stated that they would make municipalities whole relative to reductions in development charges, which again are a consumer's tax. So it's the doing. We talk a great game. I mean, we be the Olympic gold medalists of rhetoric, and I think the whole notion of a committee was actually created in Canada. I don't know. We are disproportionately Canadians represented in international organizations. And I think we're just really good at talking about stuff, but we're not good at executing. And this is where we need to get better. The one hope I have is Prime Minister Carney is a technocrat. Now, he's got his hands full, but he is, everything we've been hearing is very good about driving improvements in planning, the bureaucracy, and technology. We now have Evan Solomon's now the Minister for AI, and we're looking forward to meeting him because we got lots of ideas, things we can improve there. And these are not things that we need to create. I mean, there's a lot of off-the-shelf stuff from around the world. We just have to pick it up. And we actually do create some of our own, but it often leaves Canada in order to succeed somewhere else before it gets adopted here. You know that story. So, I'm a perpetual optimist, and I can see where there's quite a bit of low-hanging fruit here. But you're right. How they've got to come up with the assurances for municipalities, and some municipalities say, "Look," and correctly so. I've been contacted, and they say, "Hey, we're doing a good job. We didn't go crazy on development charges." And I go, "Yeah, you're right." Others, it's a different story, and some municipalities are doing a really good job. That we had a couple of A's in the report there, and I think we had 2 B's and 3 C's. So it's not all bad, but most of them were F's. So unfortunately,
and if the green light's given, you've got workers just waiting to go, right? Like we're not in a situation. A few years back, Toronto was known, for the building crane. It was like a national bird almost. That's right. There's no skill shortage right now in the construction industry, is there?
Actually, I like that idea. That's not a bad idea for a national bird. But putting that aside, I was doing interviews up until I did a big one. I think it was one of the major newspapers, and I was quoted, but it was a two full page thing on the shortage in labor supply. My quotes were down near the end because what I had to say didn't align with the story, and the story was all about skilled trade shortages. And what I was saying, we don't have a skilled trade shortage, right? We're laying people off like crazy, and it's not just skilled trades; it's our project development teams. These are the back of the house people that actually organize all this stuff, right? And we can't afford to lose those people, and this is why modular, offsite construction, what they call modular and panelized housing, will have a role in the future. But the more time it takes to address the underlying core problems facing housing in Ontario, the more we will be dependent on offsite modular, which has its own set of challenges because we won't have the workforce. They're either going to leave, go work somewhere else. We're already losing people to other parts of Canada and, in fact, other parts of the world. And a big problem there, Mike, is you can probably imagine, we're losing some top talent. These are young people that have done everything they said they'd do. The cost of housing, they don't have parental support. And guess what? They're saying, look, even though I'm getting offered a great salary, by the time I finish paying all the bills, there's nothing left. So why would I stick here? And the problem with losing those people, they are the risk takers. They're the ones we can't afford to lose. And then we've got, some immigrants aren't coming here because, the Canadian dream didn't quite work out for a lot of people. They got here, they were working harder than ever, and their living conditions were worse than where they came from. So, look, housing and the quality of housing is the core it's a core element, a fundamental element in creating a leading, economy, country. It's central to well-being, and we're failing on that right now for a lot of people who can't afford the housing that we're producing. And, we've got too many people that can't live in the jurisdictions they work in. And so, when we introduced things like the growth plan and the green belt, but we didn't allow sufficiently for densification. We just went to ex-urban sprawl, where we increased commute times, which really pushed people even further away from public transit, which was supposed to be a solution. So, the planning has been abysmal. And in fact, if you go back historically, Robert Fulford wrote a book called Toronto, the Accidental City, which was quite telling because it said some of the greatest things in Toronto happened by accident. And then Joe Barrage wrote a book on the perfect city, comparing different cities around the world. The Toronto chapter was Toronto, the Accidental Metropolis. So, we put a lot of money into planning and talking and sessions on housing. I don't know, I've lost track of how many of those has been. And where we're failing is getting the job done and executing, getting some of these solutions in place, finding that new formula for municipalities that's fair, which spreads the cost of growth related infrastructure throughout a community, just doesn't put it on the backs of new home buyers and renters. And we speed up that process using prop tech that is available, that we got some we're developing here. Other countries have long since figured out a lot of these things. And then we get those taxes down. It's crazy. Nobody taxes housing like we do.
Also would help if we get some certainty on trade and interest rates down and all sorts of other things too,
100%.
right?
Yeah. Well, this is where, in any economy, and this in good business planning, if you can survive your worst case scenario, you're okay. And we're in a worst case scenario right now. Who thought we would have an America doing what America's doing now on trade and so many other things? It's really, these are crazy times. And so it really tests the resilience of any country or region. We just happen to be so vulnerable to that right now, given our dependence on the U.S. market and how our proximity to the U.S. too, which is, on one hand, it's great. On the other hand, if the U.S. rolls over, if that elephant rolls over and you're the mouse lying beside it, you're going to get crushed, right? And that's kind of what's happening.
Richard Lyall, thank you very much for joining me today.
My pleasure, Mike. Thank you.
And thank you for listening to In This Economy. My name is Mike Eppel. You can give us some feedback on this or any other episode, and my email address is mike.eppel, E-P-P-E-L, @rci.rogers.com. On social, I'm at Eppman, E-P-P-M-A-N. Please share, rate, and review this episode. Tell your friends. And you can download all sorts of other content on the Seeker app. That's S-E-E-K-R. Again, thanks for listening. We'll talk again soon.